Hello and welcome to a Mindset Special. This is a special because I'm going to delve into the origins of paranormal belief. Now, what I mean by that is, why is it that some people are very curious, intrigued, fascinated, and maybe even obsessed with the paranormal, the strange, the weird, ufology, ghosts, Bigfoot, the Loch Ness Monster, psychic powers, you name it. It takes a special kind of person to be into those subjects. But why? Why are certain people drawn to these subjects while most other people are turned away, pushed away? Most people do not give these subjects a thought, a second thought, not even a first thought. It never enters their mind. They go about their lives blissfully thinking that these subjects are fantasy, science fiction, horror, and just fiction in general. So, today I'm joined by two people who, like myself, are obsessed, fascinated, and intrigued by the unknown, the strange, the weird, and the paranormal. I'm Gareth Davis from the Mindset Podcast and mindsetcentral.com.
And I'm Justin, founder of the LCGH Research Group and basically owner of the Anonymous Radio Network.
I'm Steve Genier, and I'm the host of Nocturnal Frequency Radio, heard exclusively on the New Visions Radio Network.com, and the founder of Southern Ontario Paranormal Society.
So I thought it would be good for us to get together and talk about how our origins.
Yeah.
Where it all began.
Yeah.
You know, because when we popped into this reality, the thoughts of the paranormal and the strange and the weird were far from our minds. Or like for most people, right? You know, most people never get the bug, never get hooked, never start thinking this way. Most people just, they're obsessed with, sport and beer and, getting married and having kids, and their mind never breaks out of that bubble. That for
the
most
normies.
People. The normies, yeah. I mean, not
blame it
everyone,
on
of
Doctor
course.
Who.
That must have a part of it. Well, I think that does play a part in it.
It
actually,
probably is, man. It probably
does. Because I remember watching Doctor Who as a kid and seeing strange and weird scenarios and making you kind of think out of the box, right?
Yeah.
When you're confronted by aliens or different realities or time travel or things that are not normal.
I think that's part of that because, of course, for me, I've grown up with that. My uncle actually got me into Doctor Who, and we watched that, but I was always into sci-fi, just a fantasy, because I even consider horror fantasy at times, and it just was always into it. So for me, I guess in an aspect, I was open to those ideas. And there's, a group of kids mostly, around our age, because we're not too far from each other in age-wise, but we were kind of brought up on pulp type stuff, kind of like underground, horror, the 70s type of exploitation movies. So part of that, a little bit of that, I think helped a little bit because, again, you're right. You have to be a little bit out of the box. And if you're watching things like that, you got to be out of the box a little bit.
I was way out of the box when I was a kid. I used to watch this, shows that people would never even, like if I had mentioned to the people now, when I watch it, be like, I don't remember that. I don't know if you guys know about this little known Canadian show called Star Lost.
No,
I don't.
Really?
Never heard of it.
And it starred Curdella.
Oh, wait.
Yeah.
Wait.
It did have some international sort of following.
So the 2000 Bowman from 2001: A Space Odyssey, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
they were all stuck on this big ship in space, and it was the trials and tribulations of.
Okay, it's all starting to come back to me.
And I used to watch Strange Paradise.
So let me ask you about Bowman from 2001.
Yeah.
So I've always pronounced his name one way, but you said it differently. How do you pronounce his name, his real name?
Who, Curdell?
Curdell? Is that how you say it?
Curdella?
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 Okay.
I think. I don't know. I could be saying it wrong. I don't know.
I always called him Curdele.
Well, I guess Curdele, yeah. It's like when people say my last name. They have a hard time saying Justin, say my last name.
Genier.
That's not the worst, trust me. Actually, that's not. I've had everything from Junior to Genier.
Genier.
Okay. Junior. I don't know.
Genier. Yeah, I could get good Genier.
Genier.
Genier is the English sort of pronunciation, and then there's Genier, which is the French whatever, and then I don't know if you guys are familiar with Richard Serrett.
Yep.
He's guest hosted on Coast to Coast.
Coast to Coast, yeah. I've listened to him, yeah.
He called me Steve Jr.
Junior.
I was a guest on his show, and he had a show here locally a few years back on local radio, and he had me on as a guest, and his Steve Jr.
Junior.
I just howled. I had a laugh with him on the show about that, but whatever.
I don't even pronounce my name right either. Trust me.
I probably don't say it right.
It's Villarreal, right?
Yeah. I mean, you could say Villarreal. Yeah, that's the Americanized version. Even saying it wrong.
How do you say it correctly?
It would be Villarreal.
Villarreal.
Do you want the Canadianized version of it?
Let's hear it.
Villarreal.
That works out just right too.
Villarreal.
Yeah, I get it a lot, working with the fellow Mexican guys, and they're like, "What's your last name?" And they do it to make fun of me. And I'll try to do it, I'll say it, and that's fine, but it's funny because I'm like, Villarreal. That's what it is, Villarreal.
You've been too Americanized, man.
It is. They actually, people are like, oh, I get taken for Arab, Filipino, obviously Hispanic, and sometimes Indian, which I guess I couldn't fit under Arabic, but I'll get mistaken for that, and then they'll hear me talk because sometimes I'll work with the guys, and they speak mostly Spanish, and here I come, although my skin's a lot lighter than some of the other guys. They're surprised.
Do you speak sun, right?
Yeah,
do you
Illinois.
speak Spanish?
No. The Spanish I know is very minimal, but it's in the back of my head. That's like the thing, So I'm trying to, since my daughter, she's learning Spanish. So technically, this would be a great time to freshen up, because I used to write it and read it better than I spoke it. Now it's back there.
Yeah. Well, I can do that. That's a skill that I have. Is like I can read lots of languages and pronounce the words correctly and say it, and it sounds like I know what I'm talking about, but I have no fucking clue what I'm saying. But so I can read it from but I have no clue what it means.
That's how I am with French, because I mean. When French people come to, people from France, they come to Canada and they hear us speak French, they say, it's very, very sloppy French.
Really?
Sloppy. So they call
I ran into something like that years ago. I used to work, back in the 90s, I used to work in Tower Records.
Oh, wow.
Oh, yeah.
And we used to have, a lot of Hispanic people working there, right? Bunch of the guys and the girls all working there, and, I always remember we had some people from Spain, tourists or something, that came over.
Yeah.
And they were speaking Spanish. And there was a Hispanic girl working the register, and they were speaking Spanish. She spoke fluent Spanish, so she started talking to them in Spanish, thinking like, oh, okay, we'll have a conversation here. And they started making fun of her because of the way she talked.
Yeah, it's different. I mean, of course,
that's messed up though. That's
it
not,
is.
That's not cool.
Even though it's the mother tongue, it's so far removed from the original dialect.
Yeah,
but they understood. But it's not like they didn't get what they totally understood everything she was saying.
There's not too much of a difference
because she was saying it with an accent or saying some of the words wrong or whatever the case may be, and they were all laughing like, and I was like, you fucks, get out of here.
When you look at for instance, the UK and you have your sort of slang and you can definitely tell the difference somebody who's from England as opposed to say Australia.
Oh yeah, sure.
Or Canada or the US, where a lot of these people migrated from years ago, and how it's changed.
Yeah,
sure, but you don't make. I mean, English people don't make fun of an American accent.
Oh, I don't know. Do they?
No.
When I go down to New York, man, I mean, like, or when I go to Chicago, it plain as day, I'm like, holy shit. I don't make fun of it, but you
hear it. Oh no, of course, yeah. You absolutely you pick it up immediately.
But I mean, the funny thing is, Steve could pass for a Midwesterner still. He can go to Wisconsin or Minnesota. I mean, parts of Chicago have that bit of that. I don't know what you want to call Midwestern dialect, but it's Wisconsin and Minnesota where you really hear it.
Yeah, except for the A, right?
Yes, except for that. It's a yo.
It's yo.
Yo.
Like I'll be in the heart of, like I'll go to Buffalo, for instance, and you'll talk to people, and they know you're Canadian, eh? And they'll accent that A. How did you know? I don't use A that often, but when I do, it's like bang, they pick you out in the crowd just like that.
I think.
See, I don't hear it that much with you, Steve.
I don't say it that much. I
don't at all. I mean, it's not that common. But I have spoken to other Canadians who use it every 3 seconds.
Yeah, well, yeah. And what was his name you have on your show quite often? Now from Calgary, isn't it? Alberta,
Trevor.
I hear quite often from him.
Yeah. But I think it varies. But I said, people are different. People, some people use it a lot, some people don't, and it's just the way it is. But it's true that when you do go to another part of the world, that another English speaking part of the world, because your ears are so highly tuned to your local area, you pick up the different accents immediately. You spot the differences without even thinking about it. It's immediately apparent to you.
Well, you know what they should do? They should have a TV show or something, and have some of the backwoods of somewhere in the States, from Kentucky or Tennessee, somewhere just have that thick redneck sort of dialogue, and hook it up with some of the Canadian newfies.
And put them together.
I swear to God, you'd have a laugh and a half.
Oh, dude, you'd be glued to that shit. You sure got a purty mouth. It'd be hilarious.
It's the American redneck against the Canadian redneck.
They might find they have a lot in common,
Oh, a lot. Except
that's good eating.
Yeah.
So I don't know. So anyway, let's get back on track here. To the tales of the paranormal. So, we all kind of stumbled into this, I guess, when we were kids. We mentioned science fiction and horror movies that all played a big part in this. But science fiction and horror, there's lots of people out there that love science fiction and horror movies, but never take that extra step into the paranormal. Some people describe it as like it's a one-way bridge. It's not a two-way bridge. In other words, people who are into the paranormal or UFOs, say people who are into UFOs are usually always into science fiction. But people who are into science fiction are very rarely into UFOs. Like you'll find someone who's like a hardcore sci-fi fan, and if you bring up the subject of UFOs, they just roll their eyes, shake their head, and think you're a mental case. Right? because for them it's science fiction, and they're all
True.
about NASA and all the, the science that's presented in the mainstream and all this stuff. And when you step outside that and go a little bit further and talk about, the possibilities of being visited and all, then they immediately like put their fingers in their ears. La la la, I'm not listening to you. You are crazy. Get out of my face. And it's the same with ghosts, right? Someone might really love scary movies, might love them, but when you bring up like, well, you know what? My house is actually haunted. Get the fuck, you're out of your mind immediately.
Yeah.
So it's like a one-way street. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think the kicker, well, at least from what I can tell from most people, is that personal experience. I mean, I personally have in my experience, as well as I was brought up very religious. So you kind of had that precursor, that little bit of that primer to kind of accept fantastical ideas that are not just, story-wise. This is demons exist, angels exist, there's a God, and so on and so forth. And through that, already sets it up, because when I was growing up, I thought, oh, demons are around every corner. They're going to decide what I'm going to do. I have guardian angels, and it wasn't like a strong belief in that, but it was just like in the back of my head, and it did affect me. I got into the church for a while. I was eventually going to be a youth pastor in my teens, and it really wasn't until paranormal research that I kind of broke away from that, and partially psychology, taking some psychology classes and doing a little bit of getting really into a base of trying to understand the world. But the main thing for me was having a personal experience, and that was realistically what really kicked it off was having the dream of my father dying, and then the next day he died. We get a phone call. He died. He died in a car accident.
Wow.
But that was not the first time I had some sort of like premonition. What I can say when I was younger, what I can express it now as deja vu, where I would feel like I felt like I've dealt with this. This was the first time though that I had a dream where it was that vivid, and next thing you know, that happens. And I've had little personal ghost stories that happened to me, but by far that was the kicker, because I was trying to grasp what this was. And as I was growing into this and growing into the church, I was asking my fellow church leaders about these experiences, and they really didn't have an answer for me. And a lot of it was, well, you shouldn't have these things because that is not the way of God, and you can only see and talk through God, and not spirits can't show you. And I didn't really guess they were spirits. To me, it was like, well, this was like a vision, like
it's like they consider it like the work of the devil, though,
yes,
right?
yes, because of course
don't go near that stuff.
Divination, all this type of stuff is considered pagan in that sense. So I was already turned away from the church, and that technically is what kind of turned me into, I need to look at this to myself, and really psychology, getting into that is really what kind of solidified kind of that investigative understanding to perspective to things. But yeah, I would say it was, at least for me and for many people that I've known that are in this field, it's usually all those things and then a personal experience happens of some sort.
What about you, Steve? What got you away from just watching sci-fi and horror movies and TV shows to actually thinking there's something to this?
You know what? It was always there in the back of my head. But I remember, I wasn't brought up in a fairly religious family, semi-religious, and I remember, being confirmed in the United Church and all that, and during that period, I said to myself, is it real? Is it real? Like, I mean, is this stuff real? And I sort of dug into it, as much as possible. And I think one thing that really fascinated me, it wasn't so much the terminology of demons, if you will, but the terminology of fallen angels. Mm-hmm. And then I started to really study about fallen angels. And I think one of the first books I really dove into was Fallen Angels and Spirits of the Dark by Robert Masello. incredible book, who highlights many of the demons, or fallen angels, if you will, that are sort of documented, religiously, if you will. And, obviously Lucifer being one of them, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And, is this real? I had to know, is this real? Back burner, years later. I had this really, really, I remember I was probably in my early teens, mid-teens. I remember lying in my room and just, I remember seeing this sort of, I don't want to say premonition. I'm not anything close to that kind of stuff, but it's this overwhelming feeling of something very religious sort of happening to me, like a fear of Jesus, if you will.
A fear?
A fear. And I kind of wonder, a fear. Why am I having this sort of feeling of fear of something that's supposed to be so good and prosperous and positive and all this kind of stuff?
Mm-hmm.
It made me wonder, and of course it was probably just my mind working over time and all this kind of stuff, and I started to really look into it. And again, I remember becoming very obsessed with the paranormal, if you will, and not so much being called the paranormal at the time, but the supernatural, if you will.
Yeah.
Having this feeling that there is so much there that we don't understand, and I want to understand it.
Yeah.
And what really kicked it into gear, I mean, I had been doing research for years on a lot of this stuff, but what really kicked it into gear, I was in film school, and my best friend passed away, and it really made me think about everything. I mean, that would make anybody think about a lot of things. But I put everything together and I said, you know what? I would really like to actually do this and push it forward. I would really like to take the skills that I've learned in film school and see if I can sort of put them into play with trying to understand the unknown world, if you will. And that's when I started to do some experimentation with audio, visual.
What kind of? You mean like EVPs and stuff like that, or?
But at that time, I didn't know anything about EVPs.
Right.
I didn't know that's what it was called. I remember seeing Lucio Fulci's The Black Cat. His take on The Black Cat. I don't know if you've ever seen that.
I don't think so.
No, I have not.
Anyways, the main character in there would go to the graveyard and take his reel-to-reel and record in the graveyard and talk to a headstone. And I'm like, I remember seeing that. I think this was like 1988, 1986, 1987, somewhere around there.
Mid to late 80s.
Yeah, mid to late 80s. And I'm like, wow, that's fascinating. Is that a thing? And yeah. I looked into it more, and I saw that there was a whole bunch of research on this. I'm like, well, I want to do this.
Mm-hmm.
So of course it revved everything into place, and then I started, doing, obviously not reel to reel, but I started doing, digital tape.
Mm-hmm. Trying to make recordings.
I did even tape cassettes.
Yeah.
And I did high 8 recordings at the time.
The video.
Digital high 8.
Did you? Now I know that in the past you've played. We've talked about and we've done shows where you've captured some amazing evidence for EVP when you've been out at certain haunted locations.
Yeah.
But at the beginning, when you're just trying to figure this all out, did you get any results?
Oh, I got results, and again, some of it might have been, I now could be sort of placed aside and explainable, but at the time I didn't know enough.
Yeah.
But that's what I mean. The more and more you're in and doing this, the more and more you learn, obviously.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The more and more you read back then, the more and more you read about it, the more and more you started to understand. It's like photography.
Yeah,
when somebody would go in and go out and do quote unquote paranormal photography, back then, I mean, there was an explosion of orb photography when digital
right.
point and shoot came out. It exploded, and I didn't really buy into it. I really didn't buy into it because I had a photography background because of film school and all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, a lot of this doesn't make sense. I don't get this. There's an explanation for this. And of course, the explanations, they eventually came out. It was the same with video. Film, when you move from film to video and you have this phenomena happening. And you say to yourself, this didn't happen during film. Okay, something's going on. Something's not right here. And
so let me get this straight. So the orb phenomena that only came into being when digital cameras started to proliferate?
I'm not saying it came into being, it exploded.
Yeah.
It exploded when more and more people were out. More and more people had access to digital cameras.
So, do you think that it was like you just said? More and more people had digital cameras, were taking more and more photos.
Yes.
Therefore, these things were showing up.
Absolutely.
Or do you think it has something to do with the way a digital camera takes a photograph as opposed to using film?
That too. Both played a huge part.
Okay.
Because I mean, in the beginning, most people did not know the inner mechanics of a digital camera.
Yeah, I was using Polaroid myself at one point.
Yeah.
Did you get orbs with Polaroid, Justin?
Not that I remember. I've never gotten any real anomalies. Just maybe one or two where I find questionable throughout my whole years. Nothing from digital to using Polaroid at all.
Because I've always thought, like, before there were digital cameras, when everything was film-based, people were very careful what they took photographs of. In other words, you'd have your camera with your 24, your 24 or 36 exposure film in it.
Yeah, 35 millimeter. Yeah.
Yeah, and you'd be very select what you would take. Okay, stand there, don't move.
Oh, yeah.
Click. You'd be very careful what you would take a picture of. Whereas with digital,
just take it every
hundreds, if not thousands of.
It wasn't expensive, right?
It was cheap, so you're taking pictures every 3 seconds of anything you want. You're not being very restricted as to what you take a picture of, like with film.
And I mean, most people, when they go and use these cameras, especially if they were to, go on an investigation, but I don't think a lot of them call them that. They would think automatically, well, I'm going to a cemetery at night to see what I can capture.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay. So your first problem is lack of light.
Yep.
So if anybody knows anything about digital cameras, not so much, it's not so bad now, but in the beginning, when you took a picture in the dark with a flash, whatever that picture, whatever was taken, the digital processor would fill in the blanks because it didn't know any better.
That's true. Yeah.
Right. So it assumes. So basically, if you have a dark background, you're going to have, pixels filled in with dark shades. right?
Mm-hmm.
Not to mention the infrared lead. There's an infrared lead on most point and shoot cameras, right? The infrared lead is an indicator of what the iris or the lens has to look at.
Mm-hmm.
So the infrared, that's for autofocus and distance, right?
Yes.
It's like beaming out, and whatever it hits, it tells the camera, oh, well, that's, X amount of feet away. Therefore, we'll change the aperture on to get a clearer photograph.
And I mean, sometimes you'd even capture it in some of the pictures, right? You'd even capture that red sort of squiggly line, if you will.
Uh-huh.
That's a notorious thing that most people would go, oh, look at I've got a vortex. A strand of hair would turn into a vortex.
Yeah, I've seen that.
So when you're dealing with elements, like if you're outside, number one, you're depending on the time of year or whatever else, you're dealing with pollen, your moisture, bugs. Bugs would always turn in video. Notorious would turn into a rod. A rod was a huge phenomenon for a long time.
Right, it was. Yeah.
People believe that they were capturing these strange creatures that were never seen before until video turned up.
Yeah, I remember that. They would like put the camera on a tripod and face it towards the house, but right at like the eave of the house with the roof, and so they'd get that dark outcrop and then the sky, and they'd pick up all kinds of shit, and they would call that the rod phenomena.
There was a guy. He was on Coast to Coast a few times. Jose Escamilla.
Something like that, yeah. With the rods.
He had some really phenomenal video footage of cave diving in Mexico there.
Oh, yeah. And they were like zooming around or something.
Yeah. And they were zipping around all over the place. And this guy, hey, look at it. I got really good footage of rods. They're called rods.
Mm-hmm.
But technically, they were just bugs, super speed. When you slow them down, they look like a squiggly line.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which was a lot of...
I don't know if they were bugs, though.
What, you believe they were something else?
Well, I'm not saying that they were like alien spaceships or paranormal phenomena. They were obviously something, but I don't know if they were bugs.
Well, 9 out of 10 times they were moths.
Okay.
9 out of 10 times they were moths. When you slowed it down and you looked at them, it was like the hyper version of fairies captured on film.
Yeah, but when you look at a moth, when you see a moth flying around, like a normal moth, they don't move at the speed that these things were captured in these videos.
Okay, some moths will, or even mosquitoes, or even flies, or whatever at night, whatever your midges, or there's all sorts of bugs to sort of pick from. A lot of them move very quickly.
Yeah.
And when you capture their wings in motion at such a quick speed like that, that's exactly what they turn out like.
Okay.
We'll have to recreate
it bothered me to no end. I'm telling you, Gareth. I looked at this from back to front, whatever, with all this, and believe me, I wanted to believe this. I'm like, wow, this is phenomenal.
Right, but it's not so much a belief thing, right? It's not like, well, I want this to be X, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
I have no desire to have it be anything other than what it is. But if you're going to throw out, oh, it was all bugs, and hey, you know what? For all I know, that's what it was. But from my perspective, it's like, well, I'm sure a percentage of them were bugs.
Possibility.
But
I said
all of them?
I said 9 out of 10 times. I didn't say all. I said 9 out of 10.
So what about that 1% then? What is that?
That's where you're looking. This is exactly with anything in the paranormal. Justin, right?
Yeah.
Anything in the paranormal, 9 out of 10 times, if not more, it is explainable. But it's that 1% that people like myself, and I know Justin's the same way, will zero in on.
Yeah.
And try to explain.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Because I've seen some footage. I've seen some footage of rods that and I wouldn't want to say questionable as in who did it and whatnot, but more or less questionable as in what exactly is it? You know, because it is true that some of the phenomena that I've seen with the rods, I guess, would be more validated. Is just kind of a weird. The way I don't even know what you want to call it, the wings or on the side. There's an animal in the deep sea that kind of looks like this particular.
Yeah, I know
thing.
what you think. Like it's like the Nautilus, right? The wavy.
Yeah,
I know what you mean.
I've seen weird shapes in those things, and I've also seen the bugs that somewhat produce this weird shape for sure. But on that 1%, there have been some that almost look like rods with little wings, kind of
something.
Twirling through. That's what. That's almost twirling. It's not even like going straight. It's like a.
Because I like it when what I like is when something anomalous is witnessed or recorded or whatever the case may be, and you look at it and you run through all the possible explanations in your head, but ultimately you like, I don't know what that is.
Yeah, basically that. Yeah,
as opposed to it's bugs.
Yeah.
It's ball lightning. It's that's because then you're just pulling at straws trying to explain it just to make yourself feel better.
Yeah.
I much prefer if someone just says, I have no idea what that is.
Yeah.
I took this photo, and I think I showed both of you guys this photo. I took a photo in an old abandoned tuberculosis hospital. Well, it turned into a mental institution, whatever. And it was set for being demoed. Went in and did just a walkthrough to make sure this place was okay. Of course, it wasn't because it was in such poor condition. But I took this photo and I reviewed my photos when I got back after taking the photos, and I'm like, wow, okay. But the good thing is, at the same time of taking this photo, I had made sure I had video going, so I had video footage to back up everything as well. Now, upon reviewing this, I had noticed something that stood out.
This is when let me just clear it. So this is not something you witnessed personally. This is later when you're reviewing the footage.
Yeah,
Got it. Okay.
The photos that I had taken with my camera, and I'm like, okay, I have to go back and I have to look at the video footage that was taken at the same time. So I went and I looked back at the video footage. I didn't see anything in the video footage. So I centered in on the photo. I'm like, okay, there is something going on here. I know it. I had a friend of mine who's a photography expert. He works in the photography industry.
Mm-hmm.
I said, take a look at this. I want you to tell me what you think. Verify that it has not been edited. The metadata has not been screwed with or anything like that. I want you to make sure it's all legit.
Uh-huh.
He ran it through every process that he uses, whatever else, and he said, whatever the anomaly is, it's there. It's not the camera. The camera, everything else, the data is perfectly normal. There's no anomaly within the camera's data, so it must have been there when you took the picture.
So it was actually out there in reality.
It was actually there in reality.
And you took a photo of it.
And I took a photo of it. And I'm like, wow, okay. And this is like probably one of the first times I've ever taken a photo that I haven't really been able to really explain.
Mm-hmm.
Other than it being, and I hate saying the word, a ghost or a spirit or something unraveling at the time I took the photo.
Well, it's something unusual that you can't explain. You don't know what it is, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's the 1%.
Right.
Or part of the 1% that I think that most of the paranormal world exists within that 1%.
Yeah. Because I mean the phenomena in itself is extremely rare.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And it behaves. It acts on its own timetable, right? Its own schedule. It does what it wants to do when it wants to do it. There's no coaxing or, you could go to the most haunted house in the world and spend a month there and get nothing.
That's true.
And the minute you leave, all hell breaks loose. There's no rhyme or reason to it.
But that's the thing. That's the thing, especially when you look into these locations. You have it's a project.
Mm-hmm.
It's time that will equate to weeks, months, years of research to understand a particular location to consider it paranormal or not.
So did any of you go into this as a skeptic, thinking
no,
this is, because I remember we talked to Gord a few weeks ago, and he went into it as a skeptic. He was like, this is a bunch of bullshit. You guys are full of shit. I'm gonna go do this and prove all you guys wrong. And when he went to do it, the opposite happened.
Mm-hmm.
He came out a believer.
I personally didn't go in it as a skeptic. I eventually grew that sort of scenario through experience, I think. And not outright debunking or anything, but being very healthy in terms of, look at, when I witnessed something or somebody showed me something or somebody wanted some sort of advice, I'd have that skepticism full frontal. Mm-hmm. Because, I mean, you have to have that. If you don't have that, then everything is a ghost. Everything.
No, you're 100% correct. You even though you're into this and you're a believer, and when I say believe, well, see, belief is a hard word also, because for me, belief implies non-existence. Right? If you have to believe in something, whether you know it or not, you're implying that what you believe in doesn't exist. Because if it existed, you wouldn't have to believe in it.
No.
Right? So it's like when someone says to me, "So do you believe in UFOs?" I'm like, well, not really. I don't believe in UFOs, because that would imply that they don't exist, right? It's not like I have to have faith that UFOs exist, right? That's the whole thing of faith, right? Faith is you take that leap of faith to believe in something that is not true.
Well,
right?
let me ask you,
you have faith in it.
What about you? I mean, how does the paranormal stand with you?
Well, it began when I was like very, very similar to what you two guys talked about. You know, as a small child, I had an encounter with something. I still remember it vividly to this day. What had happened was, I grew up in the UK, and when I was a kid, every summer, my family used to go on vacation, and we used to get in the car and we used to drive to places in England and Wales, and sometimes we'd go across the English Channel into France or in Spain, and we'd spend two weeks there. Then we'd drive home. So it was a driving holiday. So, the vacation began the minute we got in the car, right? There was an adventure from the get-go. And one year, we went to a place in the Isle of Wight, which is a small island off the south coast of England. And we were there with, I always thought of it was my cousin, but it wasn't my cousin. It was, they were very close friends with my mother and father, and they had their kids. And it was like a family friend that were very close to us. And they had 2 daughters. And I must have been like, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5, maybe 6, around that age. And we had like a little chalet on the beach. And it only had so many rooms, so we had to share a bedroom. So my mother and father were in one bedroom, the other couple was in another bedroom, and then in the main living room they had one of these sofas that you could pull out to make, like a makeshift bed out of the sofa. And on there was myself and this little girl named Tanya, and we would sleep there, 2 little kids. Mm-hmm. And I remember always being uneasy in the room. And I distinctly remember this, and this is 40 plus years later. I remember this clearly. I woke up in the middle of the night, and I looked to my left, and there was a lady standing by the side of my bed. And she was an older lady, and she had on this dress. And the thing that stood out for me about this dress was that on her left side, right above her breast, on her shoulder, there was a large flower, like a big, large carnation, like a big flower that was on her dress. Mm-hmm. And I remember looking at her, and she looked down at me, and, we made eye contact. And she had this look on her, she was smiling, and she had this look of just smiling at me, like very, very pleasantly just smiling and look at me as if to say, look, there he is, that kind of look. And this terrified me. And I remember grabbing the blankets and pulling them over my head and being scared. And then thinking, I have to run into my parents' room and counting to 10. Okay, once I get to 10, I'm going to get up and I'm going to run as fast as I can into their room. And I did. And I ran in, I jumped in bed with them, and they were like, oh, what's going on? And I told them, I saw a ghost. There was an old lady standing next to me, standing in the bed. And they blew it off. Like, yeah.
Of course.
You're dreaming, go ahead. No, but I wouldn't go. So, and it's stuck with me ever since. That was the first time I ever saw anything. And there's been a few more since then. The house that we lived in South Wales, in the UK, was haunted by something. And my parents were fully aware of it also, because there used to be a strange smell that would move around the house. And they used to call it Charlie. We'd be sitting there watching TV, and suddenly this odor would come in the room, this thick, pungent smell. It would encase everything. And we'd be, what is this smell? And then before we know it, it's completely gone. And I remember my dad on his hands and knees out in the hallway in the house, following it, trying to find out the origin, where it's coming from. We thought a cat had died under the house, but it would continually move. It would go upstairs. It would be everywhere, but it would come and go so quickly that it didn't make any sense.
That's a key thing that you often hear, and I've heard it a million times and have experienced it myself. Mm-hmm. How smell triggers something within this realm.
Yeah.
I don't know about you, Justin. I mean, Justin.
Yeah, I've been to a few places, mostly cemeteries, where we would get the smell of perfume, even the smell of fresh roses, which, yes, it's possible that the smell could have came from a drift of wind from someone's grave that sent it down, but it was a pretty strong smell when we experienced it. But what I've seen that triggered things mostly is realistically people remodeling their house, which is kind of a staple in things. But people remodeling their house tend to stir up things, and usually leads to seeing things out of the corner of your eyes and whatnot.
Yeah. But that's basically how it began with me. And plus, like you two guys, I was always, I always loved science fiction and horror TV shows and movies. In fact, the stranger the show that was on television, the more I would be into it.
Yes,
agreed.
Right? The weirder it was, the most bizarre concepts that were involved in the show, I would be all over that. If you just have like a standard drama, that's like watching paint dry.
Yeah.
It would bore the shit out of me. But once you get anything weird or strange or unusual, I was there in a heartbeat.
I'm there, yeah.
In a second. I would love that. And still to this day, I'm still the same way.
Gareth, what was the weird, TV show?
Mm-hmm.
What was the weirdest TV show you ever witnessed?
Oh, I tell you that. There was one that, once again, when I was young, it was a TV show called Sky.
Oh.
And I don't know, maybe people of a certain age in the UK will remember this. It was because there was a period in the late 60s to the late 70s. There was like a 10-year period. I'm sure it was in North America also, but in the United Kingdom especially, there was from like, say, 1968 to 1977 or 78, there was like a 10-year period where the supernatural, the strange, witchcraft, things of that nature was far more prevalent in society, in culture. It was more open, and it was everywhere. I remember, you go to the supermarket to buy whatever with your mom as a little kid, and when you're waiting in the aisle, they have all these celebrity magazines and all this nonsense. Yeah. But there'd be magazines there like Witch's Brew and the Solstice and all this witchy kind of ghosty magazines that were I mean, not anymore. Those days are long gone. But there was a period in the late 60s into the 70s where this was very, very prevalent.
Imagine if you collect them all.
Oh, I know, yeah. And this spilled into children's television in the UK. And there was lots and lots of children's TV shows, which, looking back now, they would never be made now. I remember one called Children of the Stones.
That sounds familiar.
And it was about this scientist and his son. He gets divorced and he gets custody of the kid, but they have to move. They want to change new life, so they move to the English countryside. And there's this little village surrounded by this big ancient stone circle, and it was very the genre folk horror, that very folk horror kind of genre was very prevalent in children's TV and TV in general back then. But there was a TV show called Sky, and it was about this alien boy that was thrown to Earth, but it was very, very dark. And I remember he had these purple eyes, like he would open his eye and there'd be no white; it would just be solid purple. And I remember, and there was a scene in there where he was in the forest, buried with all these leaves over him, and he would kind of rise up from all these leaves in the forest, and the music was all all this kind of freaky music. I remember as a little kid, I must have only been about like 5 or 6, but I was like, my God, this sucked me in so. I was like enthralled.
Well, you probably remember, obviously, being a child in the UK, the TV series, The Tomorrow People.
Oh yeah,
Oh, yeah.
I used to love that show. I love the Tomorrow People.
There you go. There's one. There's another one.
Yeah, I was all into that. Yeah, with their belts and they used to go for a jaunt.
Yeah.
And Tim the computer, and it was I loved that shit. It was great.
But but these are the shows that I grew up with, and I know yourself, Gareth, and well, Justin, you seem to have recognized that show as well.
Yeah, it's Tomorrow People. They even, I think, did a remake in the 90s.
Yeah, they did. Yes, they did.
It wasn't very good though.
No, no.
They never are.
No, that's true. Usually
well, the only when it comes to like if I remember from the 90s, a remake was Outer Limits. That was one of my favorite.
Yeah,
that was really good. You're right. Mm-hmm.
And I think was it the Twilight Zone had a remake as well in the 90s, and that wasn't too bad. But I enjoyed Outer Limits more than
terrible Canadian production.
Well, the Outer Limits.
The sort of
remake?
redo, if you will,
there was
the 90s.
There's been 4 versions of the Twilight Zone, right? There was the original, which is the classic Rod Serling one in the 60s. Yeah. Then it was revived in the 80s.
Yeah.
And that was great.
Yeah, that was great in the 80s.
And then they came back in the 90s with Forrest Whitaker was doing the picture you're in just into the, and that was horrible.
It was horrible.
But then now there's the new one, and it's beyond bad.
I heard it. Yeah.
What's his name?
It's really, really bad.
Pell.
Keenan. What's his name?
Jesus.
Yeah, the director that got a little bit.
Keenan Thompson or something. The black guy.
Yeah.
But see when he plays like the Rod Serling character where he's introducing the story, and he's fine. He's actually pretty good at it.
Yeah.
So I don't have an issue with him. He does a great job. It's just the stories themselves. They're just so shit. It's horrible. It's horrible.
That's what I liked about, screw the remake of Twilight Zone when you have Black Mirror.
Oh, yeah.
Well, see, that's Black Mirror should have been the new Twilight Zone. That should have been.
It is the new Twilight Zone.
Yeah, it is. I guess kind of it is, but it shouldn't have. It should have been literally. That's what the makers of the new Twilight. That's what they should have gone for.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They should have gone down, but for some reason they didn't.
No.
But then again, Twilight Zone also. That's another show that kind of blends into what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Because every week it would be a new story, but it would be a new story where ordinary, regular, normal people would be encountering or thrust into strange, bizarre, supernatural, incredibly off-the-wall scenarios. And that was always very, very attractive to me. Still is.
They also, I think, when you think about it, science fiction kind of has the answers we're looking for, or the best they can, answer. And I think that was part of the reason why I was into it, because, you look at Twilight Zone or any of these anthology type of series when it comes to sci-fi. There was one for any, like you said, ghosts or demon, anything that you could think of would fit into their alternate reality, and that was the only way you can explain dreams or some of the experiences that you had, because they were the only things that had the time to explain it. It was filling in the gaps of everything else, and here we are trying to fill the gaps on a realistic level, and it's still just we're still just as lost.
I guess so. But there were also TV shows that came out in the late 70s, early 80s, which were also must viewing. And here in the States, you had like In Search Of, right? In North America.
Classic,
with Leonard Nimoy narrating that. And in the UK, we had Arthur C. Clarke's Mysterious World.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've watched some of that too.
There was a Mysterious World, and then he did The World of Strange Powers. Now, those shows, as a kid growing up watching Arthur C. Clarke, I was glued because even I was experiencing things in this house Now, when I say that the house was haunted, it was, and it still is, but it's not a regular occurrence, right?
Mm-hmm.
We could literally go months, if not years, with nothing, right? No phenomena whatsoever. And when you least expect it, something would happen. That to kind of wake you out of your slumber. Oh, yeah, that's right. There is something in this house, because there'll be nothing for long periods of time.
Mm-hmm.
But getting glimpses of like Arthur C. Clarke's Mysterious World or World of Strange Powers, where they would show interviews with people who've experienced stuff, and they'd go on investigations, and it opened up your like, fuck, there's something to this. It's not just me. This is happening all over the world.
I know a lot of people in the U.S., for instance. They would always equate, early paranormal investigation to the Ed and Lorraine Warrens of the world.
Yeah.
And I always equated that to being very flawed, and even though they were always linked to some of these big cases, you always looked at the big cases too and said, well, just how flawed are they as well? But I mean, you got to hand it to them. I mean, if it wasn't for those two, I think paranormal investigation would not be the way it is today, if you will.
Yeah, I remember seeing an interview with them years and years ago, and being fascinated about what they had to say. But if you're very religious to begin with, and you see these guys, then you head right in there,
Yeah.
because they were coming at it from a very religious perspective.
Yeah.
Not at one time did they say, well, the chair moved across the floor, and we just don't know how that happened. They'd say, well, the spirit came.
Yeah.
The ghost of John, who lived in the house, moved the chair in front of us. They make up all this backstory instead of just saying, well, we saw the chair move. It doesn't make any sense. We have no clue how that happened.
Yeah.
They make up a backstory for the thing that they actually witnessed.
Because people, I mean, they could have done it on purpose, or they could do it just out of their own, I guess, ignorance. But people, they want an answer. I mean, that's the problem.
Well, that's very human, though, right? Because human beings, we have this big brain, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when we don't understand how something works, in order for us to keep moving forward, we make shit up. Right?
Yeah.
We imagine and make things up, well, the sun, it comes up in the morning, it keeps us warm, it helps the crops grow, therefore it must be God.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
We have these brains, this imagination. If we don't know how something works, we invent this whole scenario to kind of explain how it works, and that's the beginning of myth, and then myth bleeds into culture, and culture bleeds into civilization, and so on. So it's not a negative thing, it's just not real.
Yeah. And we deal with this in all sorts of things. Just from everything, it's like, well, even in my trade, you got to have an answer, and there's times we just make it up, because I swear to God, there's times it's like we fixed it, but really we don't know what the fuck. We just it's working.
It's like, what do you care? It's working now. Leave me alone.
Yeah. Literally, it's just telling me you did this, and I'm like, I guess, yeah, all right, that works.
But you know what's crazy though? What you just described. Doctors pull that shit all the time too.
Yeah,
true.
Right?
It's true.
They because they don't know. How many times you've gone to the doctor and you're like, dude, my arm is. Oh, it's this.
Yeah.
They just immediately they're you just take this, get out of here.
They're throwing it on you
easily to
because
accept.
they don't know. They haven't got a clue, right?
No.
They don't know. They have to troubleshoot it and try and figure it out, and all that takes time. So when you walked and say, "Oh, my back is hurting," immediately, "Oh, it's this," but they don't know what it is. They don't know any more than you do.
Yeah. You literally have to search their books sometimes just to find out what the answer is. Yeah.
But that's true because, you're right, Justin. People are like that. You'll fix it and it works. But instead of saying, oh, great, it works, thanks, they want to know, well, what happened?
What was it? Yeah. I hit it with a wrench, and we're going to charge you $500 for this part that we didn't put in.
We are easily, as a human society, to easily accept a lot of this stuff on so many levels.
Yeah.
And a part of that is the ignorance that we are. Back to the whole idea that there's only a percentage of us that are going to think outside the box here, and that's a crazy part when you think about it. That there's more, whatever you want to call it, more normies out there than there is.
Oh, oh, fuck yeah. 99.9. We're such a tiny minority. It's terrifying.
Yeah, I joke around with people, and I'm like, based off everything that I research and everything, sometimes I can't shake my head that we're just particles, particles floating around, and here we are talking and doing all. It just passes through my mind, and I'll bring it up to someone. They're like, "You think about that?" I'm like, "Yeah, don't you?" Like,
we are a dying breed.
Yeah, it's when you break things down to their basic components.
Yeah.
That's when you start, it's like when you're driving on a freeway, you're doing 80 miles an hour on a freeway. You're you're a ghost in a meat suit sitting in a chair.
Yeah.
Traveling at 80 miles an hour.
Yeah. And they're not even there. If you want to get theoretical, we're not even traveling.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
That's the weirdest part, people. We're not even moving.
Yeah. And, the perception of reality. I mean, when you think about normies, right? Yeah. Most people, all they're concerned with is putting food on a table.
Yeah, of course.
Roof over their head. They're so wrapped up in survival, these thoughts that we're having and we're contemplating don't even enter into the equation. Right, and that's most people, right? I mean, you think about, most people on Earth are poor.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
Most people on Earth, when they wake up in the morning, all they're thinking about is, well, how the fuck am I going to feed my family?
Exactly.
And I mean, most people now don't even have the attention span to even follow it.
No, that's true.
That's true too.
That's been my thing with dealing with, finding more valuable members, because of course I have some, but when it comes down to people that stay, it's not. I've even had one point we did a meeting with some long time. I guess I just want to call them colleagues, and we just decided we'll all work together since it's been so long, and we've kind of been doing our own thing. Let's just work together. So we had a meeting at the library, which is something I used to set up a lot for our group. We'll go to the library, pick out some books, maybe look up local history, or just overall, schedule things for the next coming weeks or whatever. I had them in, and I had one of my members with me, my members, LCGH members, and I went to the bathroom, or I went to go photocopy some pages, because this is what I do. So I'll have a folder and I'll dump, bits and pieces of information, so I'll print up off the internet. And they were talking to him, and after the whole thing was done, he says, "Hey, I gotta tell you something." And I'm like, "What's that?" He goes, They just wanna go and hunt, go and do things. And I go, "Oh yeah, that's cool." And he goes, "Yeah, no, but I told them, I said, we want to do the research before we go and we step foot at a certain place. We want to make sure we understand what's happening, whatnot." And these people just has been in the game as long as me. This particular incident probably happened about a decade ago. I've been this legitimately since I was about 16 years old. So these people are the same age as me. They've been in probably about that same time. So that was probably at least a decade of being involved with the field, somewhere around there, I would say. And I forget how old I am sometimes, but somewhere around there. And they were still stuck in that we just got to go find the ghosts and go into the graveyards and go into this and go into that. And it's like, it's not that, and it's, especially if you've been in this long enough, you want to gather as much information as possible. Mm-hmm. And that's where it kind of broke for me I mean, overall, I kind of had the heart in it, not necessarily the thrill seeking part of it. There was more heart in it. But when I started really doing the research and getting involved, even though these people were involved themselves, they've done cases, they've gone to people's houses, and it jokes around. I videotape people sleeping. We've all, you get it so far into this, and they still were on that same level as we were when we were kind of still figuring things out.
So they're addicted to the thrill of.
I think that's what it really is, and most people are.
Want. They just want the thrill of being in a spooky place and
exactly,
that kind of stuff.
Yeah, because
they're not really interested in finding out like evidence or what's really going on. They get a kick out of.
Here I am printing out pages of info for them off of whatever case I think I forget what it exactly was, but I make sure it's just like we're in a meeting, a business meeting. All right, you got a copy each, and this is what we're going to be looking into. Take some notes, and right away, which I was surprised they told my own member that, and luckily, again, I'm friends with them. It's not something that I was like, it was just like. Really?
Well, here's a question for both of you. So, I mean, both of you have legitimately gone on, vigils and ghost hunts and actively gone out to look for evidence to kind of validate your interest in the paranormal. I've never done that. I've never gone out and joined a group or gone on a vigil. I've never done anything like that.
So you're a researcher then, right? Is that
I think a lot about this stuff. I read a lot about it, right? And I've experienced it, but I've never gone to somebody's house or somebody's place of business or and shook their hand and say, hi, I'm a ghost investigator. No, I've never ever done that, and I've never joined a group either because it's always been my. I was like Woody Allen, I'd never join a group that would have me as a member. I've always had
in search of Gareth Davies
because I'm so. I'm not a skeptic. I'm not. I know this phenomena is real, but I don't suffer fools lightly.
Yeah.
And if I'm in a scenario where someone's saying, "Well, this must be Uncle Jim who died in that chair," I'd be like, "Get the fuck out of here! What are you talking about? Are you half a retard?" And I would not last long in these groups.
And I've been where,
what I mean?
My God, what'd you hear? Did you hear that? You see that over there? And some of these are people who have maybe at that time, particularly, let's say we were in there for a handful of years or something, but I'm already involved, let's say a handful of years, and I'm already like, you're really screaming about what we may have seen in that shadowy area, right. and this is it. Yeah, it's a headache at times.
So how did you guys get involved? That was my question before I started rambling.
Involved what?
How did it happen? Yeah, how did you take that first step into either creating a group or joining a group, or how did it happen?
Well, I for many years I was researching, and then, like I said, I said, look, I want to take this a step further, and I want to actually I want to investigate. I want to go out and look at some stuff that some claims that I first looked at a lot of local stuff, claims out there. And I did a lot of this on my own in the beginning, and then I put it out there that I'm looking for other like-minded people who are looking to be a part of a larger group, if you will, to investigate on a larger level. And it was, of course. I hooked up with a few people in the beginning that worked out very well. When I formed Southern Ontario Paranormal Society, we clicked right away. There were obviously people who were gravitating to the group and wanted to be a part of it. I had constantly had meetings set up with people who wanted to be a part of it. And let me tell you, every creature out of every corner came out and you really had to pick and choose. You really had to be very vigilant on the people that you wanted to enter the group, because I mean there are some pretty whacked out people out there, man, when it comes to this.
Well, the top, I mean, paranormal, ufology, Bigfoot, you name it, it is a magnet for people who are mental.
Oh yeah.
All right, for people, liars, con men, and people who are fucked up in the head, they gravitate to this subject like a fly to shit. You know?
We had a stalker. We had a stalker who would go to great lengths to defamate the group, if you will. Basically threatening to know where we worked, where our family members went to school.
Wow.
Everything. This guy was pretty serious in the way he was going after us. In fact, I've got every email the guy sent me saved in a file, and I'm telling you, when you look at these emails, you'd be laughing at your ass. But it got to the point where I had to contact the local authorities and say, "Look it," and I sent them all. I sent them all the emails that this guy forwarded to me, and told them something has to be done about this guy, otherwise something's going to happen. And they paid him a visit, and they told him. But I mean, this guy he was dead set in trying to find a location that we had been investigating and researching for a few years. And I was reluctant in telling him because I had a feeling that something would happen. Anyhow, he found out where the location was. We paid a visit a few days after he had reportedly gone up there. And when we went up there, it was a pioneer cemetery, abandoned pioneer cemetery, and it laid in ruins. I mean, the stones were knocked over. There was Tim Hortons. There you go. Spilled all over the place. There was coffee cups all over. Coffee cups all over the place. It was disgusting, man. It was just absolutely terrible. There were somebody had a ritual up in this grave site, this small little pioneer cemetery,
like a satanic or witchcraft thing, or some kind of.
I don't know if it was make believe, and it probably was, but there was candles. They were using headstones as seating. They were knocked over and they were sitting on them. You know, it was absolutely, shameful, if you ask me. Because, I mean, when you deal with this kind of stuff, you want to respect.
Yeah.
Respect is the number one thing. The location that you go look into, you want to respect it.
Well, especially using gravestones as a seat, and I mean that shows that you have zero respect.
Exactly.
No, I agree.
How about you, Justin? How'd you get wrapped up in this? How'd you get into ghost hunting?
Kind of the same with Steve. For me, though, it was probably already my natural instincts to investigate. I was, like I said, I was going to be a youth pastor. So at some point I was already reading the Bible. So before I got into that, I was already having that, itch to research these things. So by the time I actually got into it, I already was like, I need to look into this. So when I was living in Chicago, I eventually moved up north into Lake County. And I've heard stories. I think part of it was gathering the local stories. So obviously Chicago's the city and Lake County is the northern suburbs. One of the richest counties in the freaking United States, as well as with the Illinois itself. So, I mean, it's a pretty old county, a lot of good folklore there. And so when I moved up there, even though I've heard stories, growing up in Chicago, it was just something about listening to these stories. And I think part of it was because everything's close by. You can get to this place and you don't have to worry about driving the highway or something like that. So when I eventually moved to Grays Lake and was in high school, people told me some local stories about the area, and then eventually it grew into other cities. And one particular place was called St. Patrick's Cemetery, which we would hear stories from Bloody Mary possibly being in the origins there. If you actually check out, they think Chicago Haunts from Ursula Bielski, she actually reads, she actually notes some things about that particular case, the folklore there. So people told me some stories. A girl who I used to hang out with, and eventually we had lunch together, told me a story about a family member of hers, actually a stepsister. And their family lived behind the cemetery. I'm not going to get into too much detail because getting into all that is almost a show in itself. But anyways, she told me that her stepsister was in a coven, and that her and her sister's coven went into the woods there. And so if Bloody Mary was part of this, it's already got occult folklore as it is.
Yeah.
She supposedly killed a boyfriend there, and told me other stories. Supposedly. I haven't found any articles that tie into that. But of course, you never know what could have happened in those woods that was never reported. Because one time I went, and the cops told me that they found dead bodies there before.
Did you believe her though when she told you that, or were you like,
a little bit,
whatever?
No, right away I kind of believed it because the way she was explaining it to me just seemed sincere at that time. Of course, in the back of my head, I was questioning because I was like, well, let me go look at this place. And she says, oh, for sure you go there and whatnot. Little did I know that this place had history from the 60s and longer than that. Little did I know about the Bloody Mary story at that time. I just knew about this story, and it grew into that. So from that point on, I went with them, and every now and then we would go check out some spots. It wasn't really until later on when I was about 16, 17, I was able to have a license that I started to drive to these places on my own. So literally the lack of sleep and having a driver's license, I would go out to supposed haunted spots on my own.
On your own?
Yes, on my own.
I was the same way. Yeah.
So
really?
Yeah. So
I'm fascinated by this. This is intriguing to me.
I was already meeting people off the internet. About 16, my first investigation. I shouldn't have said it that way, but my first investigation was at 16. I was on Yahoo groups, their forums there. So previous to that, I was already kind of read up on Ghost Hunter guidebooks, some of Ursula's books and stuff like that. And so when I got into it, it was just the ghost hunting part. So it went from ghost hunting to paranormal investigation because I started coming up. But after reading these books and going through the stories and stuff, I started coming up with my own theories. So I started sharing them on the forums, and a couple of people caught them. And eventually was like, hey, even though you're 16, why don't you come with us on this investigation, which was an apartment in Chicago, and basically that was pretty much how it started. So just investigating at 16, having a little bit of the itch previous to that, and just kind of getting the stories in, and literally just getting a license and was able to drive. And most of the people that I met were on forums, and that's how I got involved. There was really no one that was within my area. And during that time, we're talking about late 1998 to about early 2000s. Yeah. The websites for ghost hunters didn't really exist. It was really left to forums and message boards.
Yeah, it was all brand new back then.
Yeah, and it was only really the popular people that had maybe a website and that was only a handful of people in my area. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Or maybe even the United States at that time, if I remember. It wasn't that many people. It was like the Laurens and then the local people who wrote books. Those were really the popular people at that time. So there wasn't much did.
I am fascinated by you two saying, both Steve and Justin saying that you would get out in the car on your own and drive to some supposedly haunted location.
It was a high. It was a high for me to do this.
Yeah.
I was so intrigued. I was I had to go. And I didn't want to wait for anybody. I was going to go do it on my own, and
now,
I did.
When you did this, though, this is both you, Justin, and Steve. When you would do this, it could be like, I don't know, a Saturday night. It's 10 at night.
Mm-hmm.
You jump in the car, you drive to wherever, some cemetery or wherever that's supposedly haunted. You park the car, and you walk into this deserted building or this cemetery alone.
Mm-hmm.
What's going through your head? Are you like excited? Are you scared? Are you nervous? Or what's going on?
Very, very excited, man. You know what? let me tell you. I'm sure Justin will probably be the same, but I always played on my heightened senses.
Yeah.
Okay, you've heard stories about this place, but I would always shut them out because I wanted to know for myself exactly what was going on. It wasn't, I'm going here, I'm not going to find anything. And if I do find something, it's a bonus.
Right.
Yeah.
I want to shut out everything because you know what? To me, they're all stories, and that's what they are. They're people telling me stories about this place, and it's their experience. Doesn't mean it really played out that way. I want to know for myself firsthand exactly what will play out. And let me tell you, sure, there was a few times that I went to some of these places that some unusual stuff happened, but for the most part, it was just pure atmosphere.
Yeah.
Nothing happened. But weren't you, not so much scared of or nervous about the paranormal aspects. Weren't you worried about I'm going to meet some maniac in here?
No, never.
Some lunatic. Or,
Never. That's the funny thing.
I was probably more afraid of, say, what animal am I going to come across? A coyote or whatever.
Wow.
Those are things that you that played on my mind, anyways.
That's amazing. Now you said that. Now I'm assuming what Steve just said is very similar to your experience, Justin.
Yeah.
Same kind of thing.
Yeah,
you get that rush of adrenaline.
Yeah, it really was. It was just like the adrenaline for me obviously was that, but it was I'm here. I'm at this place that I read about in a book. I'm at this place that I saw on a forum that someone told me that it was like you had to get to this to get here. I think that was more of the thing because I was always drawn to the places that you didn't hear about. You had to hear from the neighbor. I was like, oh, that house on that one block. No one talks about it, but man, that was what I wanted to hear. And a lot of places I went to were those. It was like you had to go through the woods to get to the side. That stuff like that, and you really had to search for these stories because I would go through and, oh yeah, I heard this one. Oh yeah, blah, blah, blah. But what about that one? And I would go, I'm here, not care about anything else. Wasn't caring for my safety, nothing. It was the weirdest. You're right. It was the weirdest experience. I did not care.
I remember going to this old woolen mill. Only the shell of it still existed. It still does to this day. And I'd heard so many stories about this place, but it wasn't so much the paranormal stories. I wanted to know the history of the place. Mm-hmm. I wanted to know what it was and why it was the way it was now. And to think that this thing was a community at one time of 300 people, mostly employees, workers of this woolen mill, who lived on site and everything else. I'm like, oh, well, this is fascinating. And I remember, I think it was about 2:00 in the morning. I said, you know what? I'm hopping in the car because I used to work nights. I was on nights, and I took a night off. And I said, yeah, I'm going to hop in the car and I'm going to go over there and take my camera, take some shots. Take my my recorder and take my video camera, whatever, and go up there. And I went there, 2:00 in the morning, And this place is in the middle of nowhere. It's got a river right beside it, obviously, because it's a woolen mill.
Uh-huh.
So there's some houses across the street, and this is in the middle of nowhere though. All you hear is it's quiet. And let me paint the picture for you. It was probably early summer, late spring, early summer. I parked down the street because I didn't want to gain too much attention from the people who lived across the street. I wanted to walk over and walk into this place because there was apparently a way to, because it's all fenced off now. But apparently, and let me tell you, I didn't make a practice of trespassing. I didn't do that, but I did in the beginning. I'll admit that. But when things got serious, I made a point of never doing that. But anyhow, I got into this place, found the access in, and I went in. And all you could, bright, late spring day, night, stars are out, quiet. All you can hear is the water running, the running water. I sneak into this place, and I'm like thinking to myself, am I crazy? This place is insane. What am I going? I'm thinking, okay, is there any animals here or whatever? And I'm sure there is, but I've been to a lot of places where there's been deer and all that at night. You usually spot them because their eyes illuminate at night. But what is going on?
Yeah.
I started taking some video footage, and I centered it on one area of this old shell of a woolen mill. And I'm like, something's moving over in the corner. Okay, what the hell is that? And of course, I got my night vision going on. I just see something moving slightly. Okay, this is insane. What is this? I turn my recorder on. I start recording and start asking questions. And whatever was moving, it never moved away from that corner. It just stayed there in the corner. But whatever. Anyways, I got home.
Probably an animal or something, right? Or
whatever.
like
it probably was. But anyways, I was there for about 15, 20 minutes. Took a whole bunch of shots, took a whole bunch of video footage, and recorded a lot of audio. And I got home, and I'd be up all hours of the night, obviously, because like I said, I was working nights, and I'd go through all my findings. And there it was. That moment when I turned the audio on, soon after I saw whatever was moving in the corner, and I go, is there somebody here with me right now? And as soon as I said that, you can hear in the distance, get out.
Jeez.
As plain as day.
So that kind of validated your experience. Because my next question was, now all these years later, looking back on this experience, were you ever like, what the hell was I thinking? But when you get that kind of evidence, it kind of validates it. It makes it worthwhile.
And it's such a tricky place to investigate even now because the people across the street are very vigilant with people who go in there at night. Yeah. And even I've tried so many times to gain access, legally, and they're very, very because of safety. And I can understand.
No, for sure. Yeah. Because if you were to fall and break your leg or fall through a floor or something, there's a million safety hazards.
Yeah, it's not very
to think about. Right.
Yeah, so I completely understand, and we were able to secure something very brief, but never ever being thorough, which is too bad because that place I find is quite active.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, guys, we've been talking for almost an hour and a half, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it. It seems like we're going to have to do a part 2. We're going to have to do this again.
Yeah.
That's good.
To kind of continue this. So, listeners, I hope you've enjoyed the conversation that myself, Steve, and Justin have been having, the origins of paranormal beliefs. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll be back, I guess, with part 2, if that's cool with you guys.
Yeah.
For sure.
Awesome. All right. Thanks for listening.